Hello and welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today no matter what it is you're doing. For our free wire tutorial on YouTube today, I'd like to share with you a bunch of grapes. Now you might want to wear this as jewellery, you might want to size it up and put it on your wall or in your bar if you're lucky enough to have one. Let's have a quick look at the project we're going to create together. So it's quite an artistic design, you can absolutely make it a very full bunch of grapes. I kind of like the fact that it's a little bit in and out. So we'll take a closer look at that on the board and then we'll have a quick word about the materials we're going to use to recreate the bunch of grapes for yourself. So I've chosen to work in some really rather large golf ball faceted lemon chrysoprase. Now these are really beautiful, vibrant beads with a lovely light undertone to them. But obviously if you wanted some flame grapes, you could use totally different beads, whatever suits you really. I'm working with rounds because it gives me an opportunity to use a repeatable round form. Now if you don't have a long mandrel that has the perfect size for your beads, just have a look around your home because you'll be surprised what you can find. So I've got a marker pen here that I've used for donkey's years as a round form. In addition to the usual suspects of my flush cutters and chain nose pliers, I'm going to be using a pair of two-step bail makers. Now mine are 4mm and 6mm, and this enables me to make the beautiful vine design that skirts around one side of the bunch of grapes. Now you can absolutely play around with the formation, you can have them much wider in the middle, tapering down to a single grape at the bottom. It's absolutely within your control how you set the individual grapes into that framework. In terms of the wire that we're going to use today, it's 2 gauges. I'm going to be using some 1mm or 18 gauge. I'll be demonstrating in raw copper because it shows up nicely. I'm also going to be using some 0.5mm or 24 gauge to add those lovely beads securely into the design. So we're going to start off up at the top of the design making a very simple bail. If you wanted to make a much more fanciful bail, then you absolutely can. Just what we're looking to have is a bail up at the top with a single strand of wire coming away, which is connected to that reel, because believe it or not, this uses quite a lot of wire. So the ideal is to work from the reel as much as you possibly can. If disaster strikes and you do run out, if you cut your wire too short or you didn't have quite enough on the reel remaining, don't worry, you can absolutely add on, just sneak a little attachment away in the back of the design. Let's get cracking then. So if I pop the bunch of grapes we're looking to replicate up in one corner, and I'll leave the beads over in the other corner for now. So I'm going to be working, as I said, with round raw copper. This is 1mm or 18 gauge, and I'm working from the reel as much as possible. Now I'm just going to free off about a good 1.5 foot, around about 18 inches, 45 centimetres, and give that a good warm and smooth through. We really want this first section to be as easy as possible. So what I'm going to do is allow myself around about 4 inches past the point at which I turn a right angle bend. And then I'm just going to make a very simplistic bail. As I have my 2-step bail makers to hand, I'm going to use those to create that round form up at the top. So that's a very small and simple bail up at the top for me today. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm happy with the roundness of that shape. Take that tail around. What I want to do is to give a really strong top end to this design. So therefore what I'm going to do is rotate as many times as I possibly can to give myself a really good strong bail up at the top. So if your wire starts to come away slightly as you're turning those coils around the core, you can very, very simply solve that problem before it goes too much further. And then just continue on your merry way until you've filled up as much as you possibly can. Now I'm going to give this a really good strong, you can see that started to double over. If that happens to you, you can very, very easily solve the problem by carefully chasing that wire around. I don't like to edit out mistakes or problems in my video. I'd much rather show you how to fix them as we go. So I'm going to take that all the way around to complete as much as possible of the design. until we run out of wire. So that's going to be around about just under 1/2 inch of coiling up at the top. What that means is we've got a really good, substantial, strong segment to start our design. When that starts to get a little bit tough, you can either fight it into submission, or you can trim away that last little bit and give that a squish and a squeeze to keep it neat and tidy. Now, if it is slightly gappy and that bothers you, don't worry, we're going to cover that up later anyway. I like to have it nice and neat and tidy as much as possible anyway. So again, I'm going to free off a little bit more from my reel and give that a little bit of a warming through. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is, let's just tighten up that final coil actually before we go anywhere. So I'm just going to push that up into position so it's neat and tidy. I'm going to put an angle underneath those coils. It's not a right angle, it's coming out more at 45 degrees, and I'm going to start with a single grape up at the top of my bunch of grapes design. So I'm going to turn the design sideways so that the loop is facing down towards the desk. I'm going to wrap all the way around my bunch of grapes. First grape, I've gone round once and then almost to 1.5 times. What I think I'm going to do is centralise that underneath my stem or stalk up at the top. And I'm just going to make sure that that's good and solid while I warm the next section of wire. What I'm going to do now is have another grape aperture. Let's just take that a little bit further up so you can see that sideways. So that's 1.5 coils of wire. The length of wire that's coming away to my reel, it's all still attached, is just past the lowest point because I want to now have 2 grapes side by side. So what I'm going to do is just very gently support inside that loop with the tip of my finger and start drawing around. Now for this one, I'm going to go all the way around a couple of times until that wire starts coming back up towards the point where I want to add my next grape into position. So I'm going to take that a little bit past that point, making sure that I can still get the form that is the same kind of size as my beads that I'm going to use. They need to be approximately the same size. If anything, your form needs to be just slightly larger. So these are 12mm beads that I'm working with today. So if your form was 12 to 13, maybe even 14mm, that would be perfect. So again, I'm going to support inside the second grape aperture, and I'm just going to allow the wire now to skirt onwards in the opposite direction, like so, until that comes away. Now that's starting to lift up just because it's actually a little bit fiddly to do. So let's put that back in. What I want to happen is for this next swoop of grape number 3 to nuzzle up against our first grape. So we've got 1, 2, this is our third form that we're going to make. What we're going to do now, because we've been bringing the wire upwards away from the board, this next little coil that we're making, we're going to take that down underneath. So as long as if you do 1 or 2 in one direction, so these have come up and up, you can see, let me just open this out so you can understand what I'm saying. There's the neck of our design with the wrapped loop bail up at the top. The wire has skirted round, and if you put that back to the board, the wire is coming up and away from the desk. We've done exactly the same on grape number 2. It's coiling around and it's coming up. The end of the wire is higher than the beginning of the wire. So we need to redress that situation, or your bunch of grapes is going to look a little bit odd. Doesn't matter if you do 1 one way, then 1 the other, or 2 one way and then 2 the other. It doesn't really matter as long as you're addressing the fact that your wire is moving in one direction. So again, I'm supporting the inside of the preceding grape whilst I make the first part of the next grape. So this one needs to go underneath so that the end of the wire is travelling back down towards where we started from. And you need a bit of pushing with your dominant thumb just to keep that into position as that moves around. And I'll take it past where I need to take it. So we've got grape number 1, grape number 2, grape number 3. Now number 3, I will later on be connecting with the second gauge of wire. So as long as it's reasonably close, and when you push them together, you're not deforming these circles, these little bubble shapes. So what I'm going to do now is add my next grape into position. Now you can switch from one side to the other, but you get a little swoosh of wire. So I'm going to make a third row now. So we've got first row. second row. Let's make a third row. But I think we ought to go for 3 grapes, so you can see how to graduate the size outwards. So just making sure that that's good and solid before I support inside the last grape shape that we made. And then we're going to make a circle, and again I'm going to bring this one underneath so the wire is going back towards the desk, like so. Just going to close that up. So the wire has come from the stem, it's circled round and up, and then round and down, round and down. Now this one is just going to be almost a single section of wire. It's only one and a little bit before we start adding our next grape into shape. If you want, you can take that a little bit further out so that you get a more even graduation in terms of numbers of grapes. But I think what I'm going to do is actually strengthen that, because it doesn't feel right just having a single pass of wire. So I'm going to take the wire all the way around again. And this again is going back down towards the desk on this turn. So I'm reasonably happy with where that's sitting. If you wanted it to be further out so that your stack of 3 grapes sits neatly, what you'd need to do is to support that second row and just draw that around a little bit so that it sits further out to the side. You see, if I just very carefully push that along, that's taken it slightly further out to the side without losing any size. So this has got a whole heck of a load of coils going around, but that's fine because we want it to be reasonably strong. So again, I'm going to support the inside of the last grape that we've made and start bringing that wire around the round form. Now we did 2 coming up, 2 going down, so this one I want to come up again towards the camera. Bearing in mind I've got to move that slightly, because you need to be able to see what it is I'm doing. So we've gone down, now we're coming back up in terms of our coil, so that's 1 up. Let's do another one coming up. What we need to be aware of is that the next grape needs to be attached on this side at a later date with that finer wire. So again, I'm supporting the grape that I last made, and then I'm bringing that next section around. So we had 1 going down, 1 going up, so we need another one going up, or you could ring in the changes and have this one going back down. Doesn't really matter as long as you're overall going in the similar number of turns of ones that are going up and ones that are going down. So I quite like that with a little bit of a gap in the middle. If you didn't want that with a gap in the middle, you can very simply manually adjust that so that they sit more evenly. Now at the moment this is looking a little bit too neat for me. I'd rather it was actually a little bit haphazard, so I think I might take the next section of grapes. So we've got row number 1, row number 2, row number 3. For row number 4 I think I'm going to decrease back to 2 grapes. So let's bring that into position, support the preceding grape as you draw that wire all the way around. Remove your round form, and if you do make a bit of a mash of it, just unwind it slightly and start again. So what I'm going to do is continue in exactly the same vein, making sure that the open sides, so we've got a closed side here, this side is open. They're on the same side of the bunch of grapes, but they're not connected. So you need to be able to have those touching each other, because when we drop the grapes in later, that's how they're going to connect, and it's going to secure the whole design together. I'm going to continue now doing a few more grapes, and I'll join you back in a couple of moments down at the bottom. So I've continued with the exact same technique, a couple more rows of grapes. I'm sure that's not a thing anybody's ever said before in their lives. If you'd like to join me back down at the board, I will show you now where we go next. So down here at the bottom, I just cut away the tail because having it connected to the reel whilst demonstrating is a little bit tricky. Now, the simplest way to finish off this design is to just put a little bit of a coil down at the base there. But what you can do is add a little bit more of this vine work if you like. However, if you have run out of wire, I'll show you how to truncate that design now. I'm taking the end to around about 1 3/4 to 2 inches, and I'm going to pop it back in now with my round nose pliers, and I'm just going to make a bit of a coil. So I'm going to start off at the tip of those round nose pliers, turning a circular form, getting that to close up neatly, squishing it into position, and then you can do an open coil or a closed coil. if you want to. I would say probably on this time I'm going to do a slightly open coil and then have something of a bit of a lovely swooping arc coming away down at the bottom there. Let's try and keep those margins between the wire vaguely similar. You could have them ever expanding if you wished to. But there we go, we've got a little coil, an open coil sitting down at the bottom, and because that will be a risk for catching on things, what I'm going to do is give that a really firm squishing. You could hammer that gently if you wanted to, but for now I'm just going to give that a bit of a squishy squash. So the next thing remains, if I just stretch this out slightly, you'll see that we've got open sides and closed sides. So this is open just here, just here, just here, just here, and just here. And what we're going to do now is to secure the entire design. Pays to keep your round form on hand, because as you're working you might need to just re-roundify some of those forms. What we're going to do is add in the grapes, and at the same time we're going to close up these sections where the design is open on one side. Now you do need quite a long piece of wire for this to work. If you want to do it all in one go, I'd say probably 2.5 to 3 feet would be adequate. If by any chance you cut your wire and you end up with an insufficient quantity, don't worry about it. You can't work off the reel on this because we need to wrap around sections of wire as we go. So if you can't quite get that all in one go, it doesn't matter, because there are plenty of places that we can hide beginnings and ends of wire into the design. So if you look right up at the very beginning point, you've got a single pass of wire underneath that upper level, and that's where we're going to attach our first segment of the lighter gauge wire. Now this is 0.5mm gauge or 24 gauge wire. Now you could use a little bit of a heavier wire if you wanted to, because the drill holes in these 12mm lemon chrysoprase are absolutely huge. But if you need to use a lighter wire because your beads are drilled small, that's absolutely fine. So what I'm going to do is take around about 1.25 inches just over the top, and I'm going to add that on a single pass of wire just south of the neck of our design. Now the reason I always start off with wrapping around a single length of that wire is because you can get a really good tight bind to that section, and that's what we want. We want this design to last and last and last. So I've got a good 5 turns. I'm going to try and maximize that as much as I possibly can, and just see if I can get a few more turns in there before it starts to meet the previously coiled section. So I'm going to take that over the top and trim away just at the back, and then neatly squish that into position. So you can just give that a bit of a pull to get that nice and neat. Trim away that last little tiny fragment, pop it in the melt pot, and then just take that end and make it disappear. So I'm going to give that a squish to get it to sit inside the design. So what we have now is a long length of our lighter gauge wire. Now this is the risk. It's going to get tangled in some of your bunches of grapes, but don't worry about it, it'll all be worth it in the end. So what we're going to do is just pop the design down on the desk, find the far end of this great big long length of wire. We're going to add our first bead into the mix. So I'm going to slide that all the way along and get that to sit down in the circular form that we've created. Now we're going to start on this side just because that's where I've put the wire, but if you wanted to start on the other side it doesn't really matter, because we're going to tie everything together anyway. So what we're looking to do is to circle around 1 or 2 passes of wire. Now when we're adding the first segment on, we absolutely must travel around just 1 piece of wire, because you get an excellent security. For the next section of the design, it doesn't really matter if you're passing around 2. You can, if you want to be a stickler for accuracy, and simply go around 1 each time, but I'm not going to worry about it because we're just setting our beads and tying the design together. So I'm going to circle around either 1 or 2 of the circular form wires just beneath the bead, pretty much opposite to where we started. Now one of the reasons that working with just a slightly heavier wire, so this is your 0.5mm or 24 gauge, it's just a little bit heavier, it's going to be doing quite a lot, so having that extra strength is really useful. Now, it doesn't matter if you join here first or here first, but the reason I'm going to choose this side is because it's going to enable me to join the open side of the bunch of grapes. So if I bring this slightly closer to you, what I want to do is to stop this from opening in wear or in decorative nature. So that's where I'm going to go next. I'm going to take the end of the wire without a bead through that next grape, and this was grape number 3, but the point is I'm joining my first solid grape, solid because it's joined to the neck, to the first open grape. So I'm going to draw that wire all the way round. Now if you just want to do it once, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to bring that back up inside that first grape aperture. You can see the wire is coming through there. Pull that tail all the way through. Now look at where I've got one of my non-dominant fingers in that hoop of wire, and that is because it helps me to stop it from kinking. If the wire kinks, it can later become weak and drop. So what we're going to do now is travel onwards in this direction to get our next grape into position. If I pop the bunch of grapes down on the board and add the next bead. One of the joys of working with beads with massive drill holes is that it doesn't take me 17 years to get it threaded. So again, what we're going to do is to attach this to either one or two of those passes of wire. So I'm just going to draw that around a couple of times. I'm going to find a gap inside our, it's where we put grape number 3. So I'm just going to, the end of the wire's gone for a walk. Let's pop that back in. So I'm just connecting the bead to the frame. And again, you can support that wire with a non-dominant finger or thumb whilst that wire pulls through. If I flip this back over to the surface, you can see that not only have we connected the open sections, but we've also added in our next bead. Now there is no law that says you have to go in a very even dot matrix printer style fashion, adding all of those grapes in turn. The end of the day, you will need to have connected these sections that are open. So you can do that in whatever order you want. So for me, my next bead would be this one. I'd drop the bead into the 3rd row. Then I would go across to the centre, and then I would come down and make this connection here. I would then possibly go to the other side because it's a convenient time to do so. Connect the next open section and down and across. If you need to add supplementary pieces of wire to go back and add in beads that you haven't set, you can do that. The main point of this part of the tutorial is making sure that this loop is connected to this loop, and so on and so forth, so that by the time you get to the finished article, everything is nice and sturdy and secure. So I'm going to set 1 or 2 more beads just so that you can see what happens as we go. I'm going to support the design on the desk, bring in my next one. I think I'll make this one slightly more lemon colour. I can never remember the difference between sultanas and raisins, which are grapes and which are black grapes and white grapes. It's all very confusing if you're me. And this is from somebody who chefs sometimes. So I'm going to take the tail of the wire back up inside. You can see if I just waggle that around a bit, you can see really nicely where that's going. I'm encapsulating both turns of the wire on this section of the frame. Now, if you only want to do one, that's fine. I'm going to do 2 because it adds to the overall strength of the finished design. So what I'm going to do here is a few more passes of wire until I get around to this central section. Now, the fact that you've got a few more passes of wire really shouldn't be a drama to anyone. They don't have to be neat and tidy. Almost brought the whole desk into the design then, so I'm just going to draw that around. They don't have to be snuggled up together. You don't have to fill every inch of that heavier wire with lighter wire. You can open that out just a little bit. Let's do another couple of turns and then I'll set just one more grape before we move on to the next part of the tutorial. So I'm going to draw that around again. A little bit of open weaving as we go. You can see there are gaps between the turns of the wire. If I pull that out of the way, you will be able to anyway, until we get into position to add our next set of beads. So let's just hurry that along a little bit. Again, supporting underneath is key because it stops your wire from kinking. So all I'm going to do is just draw that wire over a bit because you don't need to see that 50,000 times. Let's add in the next bead. This is a lovely glossy one. you may need to straighten your wire, and in some ways it may be better to work with a number of shorter lengths rather than one great big long length. It's entirely up to you. So what I'm going to do now is draw the wire around just this central bead hole or bead aperture, and I'm going to work back towards the next open section. So my next bead along will be this one. So like I said before, you don't have to worry about adding them in any specific order. You can very simply go back up in the opposite direction. So you can see the wire is coming up inside that bead frame. Draw the tail all the way around. I've hit the other camera now. Wow, that's the first. Draw that all the way through. Now, if you look carefully, because this is still open, you can make your life slightly easier and just draw the wire through before taking the tail back up again. And as I said, you don't have to fill every single moment with weaving wire. So what I might do is just draw that down now so that we can continue securing the frame. I'm going to continue on my own until this is all full, and then I'm going to join you back in a moment to show you how to make the vine work that skirts around the side and balances the design. So I've completed the setting of each of my beads into the grape frame design, and I've also ensured that each of those open sections have been tied securely together with maybe 2, maybe 3 passes of wire connecting the frame that was open together so it's nice and safe. If you'd like to join me at the board, I'll show you what that looks like now, and I'll also show you a supplementary way in which you can build up to a 3D design if you like. So the design has been tied together. Pretty much all of the places that were open have been nicely, neatly tied together, so you can see that things are a little bit mobile, but that's how I wanted this bunch of grapes to be. I wanted some gaps and spaces. I didn't want it to be perfectly even. I'm also going to play around with how that coil sits down at the bottom, so it's quite a jaunty little journey that the design goes on. What I've left is a sticky uppy bit of that 0.5mm or 24 gauge wire. I've just finished off by rotating 6 times around a single pass of wire, which is how you would end off to make sure that those are nice and secure. And I've just passed the wire up through the centre of the design so it's sitting on the forward side. Now if you wanted to build up to a slightly more 3D design, it's very easy to just drop a little grape in over the top and find a place in the centre of the design where you can drop that wire back down again. So I'm going to pass that through inside the housing for this particular piece, pull that nice and firmly into position, and you can see how that's going to build up. So again, for security, I will go 3 or 4 times maybe around a bundle of those wires in the middle. So let's just go twice for the sense of expediency. So that's tied together. For your security, I would suggest turning another couple of times around just to make sure it's good and solid. And then, lo and behold, we've got another small gap here. So you can work from place to place if you want to add supplementary beads. And I'll just do a couple. Let's get that into position. And that's going to sit slightly more proudly. So I'm going to push that down again inside a piece of the frame where there is a bead sitting inside a housing. Pull that down into position, and then I would tie a couple of times around the single section of wire that you see just at the top of this grape to make sure that that's nice and secure. Now you can have 1 or 2 on top, you can absolutely cluster it, you can add as many or as few as you like. I think that that's probably sufficient as it is. So after the tutorial today, I will just tidy away that loose section of wire by tying 3 or 4 times around a single piece of wire, trimming and making sure that that cut end is nestled away inside the design. What I want to show you now is a beautiful technique which works best on 1mm or 18 gauge wire. I'm going to demonstrate in raw copper 18 gauge 1mm wire, and it's a technique that you can use to enhance almost anything. I first taught this back on TV in 2016. It might have been 2015, but I can't remember because I've slept since then. At some point in the past, in the distant murky past, and it's a design that I use to enhance pieces of jewellery all the time, and especially wall art which I make from wire. So it is fiddly to get your fingers around to begin with, But the difficulty is in the brain and not in the fingers. It's a super easy technique. It requires you have a set of these, which is a 2-step bail making plier. Mine are 4mm and 6mm posts on the sides. And I'm going to show you now how you can create a really gorgeously detailed piece of wire work, which you can add on to anything. As so happens, it works beautifully on our bunch of grapes design. So for this design, I'm working in 1mm or 18 gauge wire. Ideally, you will need to work from the reel. Now I've got a tiny bit of scrap wire here, which I'm going to show you the basic design to begin with, and then I'll do a little bit of that work utilising the wire that's on the reel. You'll need to have a good couple of inches spare wire at the leading edge, and you'll need to leave a good couple of inches at the other end once you've done it. I'm going to start just past the middle on this one and show you the basic design. So what we're looking to do is to use the larger of your 2 pins to create a round form. So if I turn that all the way around, that's where we're going to start. So you'd have a good 3 inches or so of spare wire at the beginning. Once you've made the round form with the larger pin, in this case this is the 6mm size, we're going to go in with the 4mm size pin. I'm going to pop that inside the lower edge, and I'm going to create a circle inside that circular form using the smaller pin. So you've got a large pin size and a small pin size. And what we need to do is make sure that that circular form comes back towards the round shape. Once you've created that form, you'll need to take your pliers out and put them back in again, but with the small pin in a slightly different place. You're going to take the end of the wire that's connected to the reel and draw that all the way around. If I remove the pins, you'll see. So we've got a large form with the small form in it. The wire then does almost a figure of 8 manoeuvre. And what we're going to do now is pop the small pin in, like so. And I'm going to take the end that's connected to the reel all the way around, so you complete a circle with the small pin side. Then you remove the pliers from the whole operation, pop the pliers back in again, and continue with the large side. So if I remove that from, remove the pliers from view for a second, I forgot the word pliers then, you can see how it's a large circle to begin with. When you're almost 3/4 of the way around the large circle, going in the same direction, you complete it as a small circle. Then as you pass the edge of your first large circle, you switch directions to create a large circle in the opposite direction. You're then turning back again to the small pin to complete the circle as a small circle. Now it sounds crazy. It sounds absolutely bonkers. And what I might do is just move the camera in a second and show you that end on. After something of a rejig in the studio, I've brought the camera much further away from the articles on the board so that you can better see how to create this lovely segment of swirling leafy vine work. So I'm using round raw copper in 1mm or 18 gauge wire, and you will need to work from the reel as this can be quite wire hungry. So if we have the tail going away to one side, which represents it being on the reel, I've actually cut myself a length of around about 18 inches because otherwise everything is going to go on the floor. So I'm using my 2-step bail making pliers, which are 4mm and 6mm. As long as you have 2 pegs which are different sizes, one which is a little bit larger than the other, this design will work. So I'm going to leave about 3 to 4 inches of spare wire at one end, which gives me a great way to anchor this onto the main bunch of grapes design. What we're going to do is start with the larger of our 2 pegs and start swirling around to create a bit of a U shape to begin with. But what we've done is we've created the idea of the roundness using the larger of the 2 pegs. Might take that slightly further. And then what we're going to do is insert the smaller peg down at the bottom of that circular form and just rotate, rotate, rotate around until you get a small circle inside that larger circle. So at this stage I'm going to pop those round nose small side back in again and just take that a little bit further round. So we've got a large circular form with a small circular form inside it. And this is what I mentioned earlier about it being difficult in the brain but not difficult on the hands. Once you've got a large circle, small circle inside it, we're going to change the direction of the wire. So I'm going to pop the small side of my bail makers back into the smaller circular form, like so. And then I'm going to draw a circular form down underneath until we get 3/4 of a circular form running around. So it looks like a little bit of a snowman or an 8 kind of shape. We're then going to continue with the wire moving in the same direction but inserting the smaller of the 2 pegs that we're using. So take the tail around in the same direction until that crosses all the way underneath that figure of 8 or snowman shape. So it's a coil inside a coil or a circle inside a circle. The larger circle only ever forms a semicircular shape or a half circle shape. And then the smaller circle is complete and sits down at the base of the segment. So now we're going to take the smaller side again, pop that back into the small circular form and switch directions with that wire. So the tail comes across underneath and then we remove both of the pegs from the design. Put the smaller side down at the base where we had the larger size a moment ago. Continue in the same direction around with that tail of wire, like so, until you get the small circle sitting down at the bottom of the large circle. Now I like it when it goes over onto one side, but what you need to do is to continue that wire all the way along. Just hit the camera, it's in a different position. So you may need to just open and close until you get that full small circle formed. Then we're going to put the small form back inside the small circle and switch directions with the wire, so that comes all the way across and starts to come back up. So you've got a full semicircle there, maybe just a little bit more. Then in with the small size again, I'm going to take the wire underneath this time and just rotate that around until it sits down at the base of the large form. So I've had to move the studio around to get the camera far enough away so that you can see what's happening. Hopefully this will all make sense. I'm going to go for another couple until we get enough to work with. So small form goes back into the small circle. Wire switches direction and comes back on itself to create, let's go with 2/3 of a circle. You remove from the design your bail makers before putting the small size in the bottom of the large circular form that you've created. So I'm going to bring the tail over the top and around until we create a completely sealed or a complete small circle down at the bottom. The trick here is having the camera in a position where you can see what's happening. So I'm going to take that tail of wire all the way across. If I remove the bail makers, you'll see that we've got that small circle down at the base. I've removed the bail makers, so I'm now going to put them back in. I'm taking them out and putting them back in because it allows you to see how the design builds. So a circular form in the opposite direction with the large side. Put the small bail maker side back in. I'm going to take the tail underneath this time and draw that all the way around. So I'm moving the form as I go. So we have that small circular form down at the base, and then I'm going to put the small side back in and switch direction with that wire again. So if I just remove those pliers, you can see how that's going to continue on. So hopefully that made lots of sense. I did have to move things around a little bit because I wasn't able to bring the camera quite far enough away. So let's have a look at what these look like individually and then let's put them together. So I have my bunch of grapes design, which has got just a couple laying over the top to give it that slightly more 3D effect. And I've got a length of curly, squirly, I don't know what you want to call it, but you've got some spare at one end and some spare at the other end. Now I've got a good 3 to 4 inches up here, so I'm going to use that to attach up at the top around the wrapped loop that we made right at the very beginning. So I'm just going to give this a bit of a warm through. As you're working with this squirly whirly design, the wire hardens all the way along because it's quite impactful on the copper itself, and it does tend to get just a little bit tense. So I'm putting some extra warmth into this just up at the top. I'm going to lay it over the top near where I want it to come away from the design, and you may need to just push that around until it comes away at an angle that you want it to. So I'm quite happy with how that looks. So I'm going to lay that over the top like so, and then I'm going to bring that tail all the way around the core that we made earlier. It doesn't have to go all the way up to the top. I've gone for 5 coils around the neck of this piece, and what I will do on the end here is just add a coil. Grapes have lovely little tendrils growing on the vine, so to have the ubiquitous coil that appears literally everywhere in my work is no bad thing, because it just looks like a tendril of grape vine basically. So I'm going to take that coil all the way around. It's a nice fluid open coil, a little bit more open than the one down at the bottom. Make sure that we get that really where we want it to be, and I'm just going to allow that to circle up and over. You could spend more time getting that to sit exactly where you want it to, but overall I'm quite happy with how that's looking. So what we need to do now is just form this section of really useful swirly whirly design so that it sits around the outside. Now this is not a realistic and botanically correct representation of a bunch of grapes with vine work. I just like how it looks, and this technique is super useful all by itself, so I hope that you will find use for that over and over again. So what I'm going to do is just undo a little bit of that coil down at the base, and I'm going to, in exactly the same way, just wrap around that core wire with this last little bit of tail that we had remaining at the bottom of the squirly whirly wire. So I'm going to sit that into position and just wrap that around a couple of times, just so that it all connects up. And you can tighten that up by re-tightening the coil. And then this tail I'll probably put, you've guessed it, another coil over the top. It's quite nice to just be fluid and allow your design to kind of grow. Not literally, obviously you can't go grow grapes from wire. But I'm just going to draw that around a couple of times before I sit that up and over the top of the other coil. As long as it's connected, that's what we're looking to do at this stage. And I might just draw that back slightly. You might wish to go for slightly more coils around that core. But I'm just going to push that down into position and sit that side by side with the example I made yesterday. So perhaps not jewellery, perhaps artwork. Whatever you want it to be, you've got some really cool techniques to work with there to generate your own designs, and this I genuinely love making. It's a bit of a mind bender when you first start to make it. It took me a long time to develop it, to make it so that it would be useful. I put this around the outside of cabochons. I use it to set cabochons as well. It's a really groovy piece of squirly whirly wire. Well, thank you so much for joining me here again on the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I've had a riot with you today making bunches of grape artwork. You could wear it if you wanted to, it's entirely up to you. I look forward to seeing you back here on YouTube again very, very soon. If you like the content, don't forget to like and subscribe. Take care of yourselves and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.